actually transformation. I think it is one of the most hyped, overused words when organizations start to look at what does truly disruptive technology do, and what's the promise of truly disruptive technologies. And if you think about some of the innovations we've seen in the last couple of years, like social business, like cloud, like mobile, we've rushed to use the word disruption over transformation. We've rushed to say, oh, this is going to be disruptive in and of itself. Social business was not disruptive. Cloud, other than disruptive to vendors, was not just disruptive on its own. Mobile, as a technology, was not disruptive in and of itself. But unfortunately, I think we have reached a point, and I hate to admit it, where we are truly starting to see the early forms of disruptive business models where traditional business models are being turned upside down and new business models are coming to play. And I think one of the best definitions that I actually agree with when you start to think about true disruption is what Clay Christensen put in place, and it reads, disruptive innovations transforms complicated, costly products and services that were previously available only to a few people and turning them into simpler, cheaper products available to many people. And if you start to look at what's behind disruption, there's one common theme that I found across multiple examples that I'm going to share with you right now that suggests that disruption truly happens at the last mile. And what do I mean by the last mile? And we're going to look at 4 or 5 examples to try to explain that to you. Some of them familiar to you, and hopefully some of them are new that we can discuss together. The first one is the business of networking. In 2009 or 2010, Cisco decided to get into, they looked at the success that they had as a networking company that built switches and routers that all of us use in our businesses today. And what Cisco found was, hey, we provide the hardware and software that connects people. Why don't we get into the business of connecting people itself? And they came out with a product called Cisco Quad. And Cisco Quad was supposed to be like Facebook inside the enterprise, and they said, we're going to move up the stack and start to get into the business of connecting people, not just building the technology at the back end that connects people. Well, it didn't work. Now what you find is Facebook said, wait a second, we have 1 billion people, which sounds like a lot to all of us, but there's another 6 billion that they don't have. And when they start to look at why they don't have those 6 billion people, not all reasons, but one big reason is the networking technology underneath it that connects people is expensive, is hard to get, is inconsistent, and billions of people are left off this thing called called social networking on the enterprise. And so Cisco has now decided to go downstream and open source the best networking technology and threaten a traditional networking model where they will provide free networking technology to the masses so that the other 6 billion people who are not online can start to get online. What happened there? Facebook, who owns the last mile, which is they actually have the people, were much more effective and powerful to be able to change the entire supply chain of technologies that connects all of us together. One of the hottest examples that are in market right now, if you look at the whole payments business, again, you look at the traditional vendors who have been in payments. The telecommunications vendors who power phones decided that they wanted to get into the payments business, and they started to put payment technology inside SIM cards. That didn't work because they didn't control the phone. Then you had companies like PayPal that provide digital payments online who started to build apps and said, use our app on a mobile phone. That was too kludgy because I had to leave a commerce site, go to some other app, try and find information to be able to make a purchase. What does Apple do? Apple embeds payments right into the operating system of its latest phone. Why? Because Apple owns the last mile. They own the very device that many of us here have in our pockets right now. They could rearrange the entire supply chain of how payments work by deciding where payments will sit on your phone inside the operating system. Today, they let you put your Visa or American Express or MasterCard into there, but who's to say that Apple decides that they don't really need anyone because they're controlling the actual transaction? Apple has more money in its bank right now than the US Treasury. Apple could become that bank that takes entire industries out of play. Why? Because they own the device that's in your pocket, your pocket, your pocket, mine. I know some of us have Samsungs here too, but you get my point. What is that? That's the last mile. The last mile that owns the actual device controls the entire supply chain that heads behind it. You know, people look at Tesla as a car, which it is, of course, but if you work with me for a second, Tesla is also the last mile in a gigantic delivery of hardware and software and applications and an assembly line. If you think of all the hardware and software that goes into it, that manifests itself in a car. I just read an article yesterday. Tesla has decided that they've had some breakthrough in their technology where they can extend the range of the battery by about 50 hours. How they're going to put that into every car? They're going to send a software update overnight, and every car is going to have 50 more miles before they need to update the battery. That's how powerful software design models are becoming. Now, who's to say that Tesla cannot also start to decide now which Maps application shows up in your car? Or which restaurant shows up that is within a 5-mile radius when you suggest a restaurant. The power that the last mile has on deciding what goes into that final mile experience, again, is being retested inside an age-old industry like manufacturing, which changes not just the components and the parts that go into it, but every single software piece that you and I use that drives our experience. That is tremendously powerful. Netflix is one of my favorite examples. Came out to be just a movie studio, went out to be a rental facility for movie studios. Sounded like a great idea to the movie studios. Why? Because people weren't buying DVDs, and this was another digital channel to distribute movies. Netflix gets to hundreds of millions of end users. What does it decide to do? Write its own content. Last year, Netflix won 7 Emmy Awards for its own movies. In effect, kicking the movie studios to the curb and saying, I built my whole business on your back. Now it's time for you to move because the user is on my platform. And they will now decide what movies you and I start to see. And again, 7 Emmy-winning movies are not bad movies, clearly. I mean, TV shows, sorry. They're not bad TV shows. Think about how powerful that is because they own the relationship with you and me more so than Disney, who owns the artists and the movies, right? The last mile, again, will decide and rearrange the entire supply and value chains that come beyond it. Retail, one of my favorite examples, this is a small company in Silicon Valley called Poshmark. How many of you have stuff in your closets, expensive things that you bought, a bag, a purse, they happen to be only women's clothing here, that you'd like, that you're not kind of using, but you don't know what to do with, and you paid a ton of money for it. Anybody have anything in their closets? I do. There's an $18 billion used marketplace that exists right now, $18 billion. There's $700 billion worth of commerce, though, done retail in the US. And what Poshmark is doing is saying, if we could digitally create a marketplace where you could find a place to get rid of those things that you have that are really expensive because you don't want to use them, for 20% of the cost, which is what they take as a convenience fee, you gave birth to an entire new model that starts to compete with new retail. You've now freed up freed up cash that you have because you can sell this, and you can start to create an entirely new buying cycle that didn't exist till today. Poshmark is doing that to compete with brand new products, right? They did $100 million in revenue in 4 years from zero, right? I'm a big food guy, I cook a lot. This is one of my favorite examples. Munchery is a business where what they're doing right now, again, is they are looking at how restaurants have artificially controlled the number of good chefs out there and the number of people who would love to eat out but can't afford to eat out. And so what Munchery does is they have found a way to take typical restaurant costs and cut it into half by going to 10x, 100x of the chefs who don't get into good restaurants, who would love to cook for you and send food to your house for half the cost of what you'd pay at a restaurant. They created supply side, all these chefs who can't get into good restaurants, and they created massive demand from people like you and me who would love to eat out more often, but it's just not economically feasible to eat out more often. Now you can get incredible chefs sending food right to your house, disintermediating that whole block in the middle, which is the limited amount of restaurants who are sitting in one place. This is an entirely new way of coming up with disruptive models that are starting to look at new waves of businesses that are going after very traditional businesses in there. And so what does this do in my mind? This essentially, if you look at Uber, what is Uber doing? Uber is fundamentally finding ways to find more drivers who would love to service more passengers, but there was this taxi business in the middle that was limiting this demand and supply artificially. What is Manchuri doing? Taking 10x the amount of chefs on one side, 10x the amount of customers on the other side, and finding new ways to be able to go in there. That is disruptive. That is creating brand new models out of nowhere. That is not incremental. And so we spent some time looking at what are some of the criteria behind these things, and there are three things that really jump out at me that define all these businesses that we looked at, and which is where I believe enterprises can start to really understand how this works. First is untapped utility. There were those 10,000 chefs that couldn't get jobs, who now have found millions of customers who would love to get a chef home meal show up at their house for about $9 a head, right? Untapped utility. Untapped utility that digital models now find a place for it to be able to come out and actually play out. Every single one of these is data-driven. The idea, I mean, can you imagine Uber using traditional CRM technology? No. Every single time you order a car, the amount of data it starts to know about you and me, our preferences, what kind of cars we like, where we go. I only use Uber when I go to the airport. It knows this about me. It knows that my travel is time sensitive. There's all this data starts to build profile information about us, not by someone manually entering things, but by just monitoring the work that we do in terms of how we're working. So fundamentally here, you've got a data-driven business model is the underpinning of the entire new digital economy. And then finally, it's digital customers, partners, and employees, right? The idea that Uber lets not only customers rate the drivers, but lets drivers rate the customers is a phenomenal advancement if you start to think about creating massive amounts of transparency inside these new ecosystems. There is no information arbitrage. Nobody controls anything. The information is out there. Whether you're a good passenger or you're a good driver, all that information is available out there. The underpinnings of these new digital models exposes a lot of this data so you can start to drive behavior and drive relationships in new ways, right? And so you have to now look at what is the implications on the platforms you use as organizations, the applications you use, and networks that you might want to participate in, right? And so there are three things that I just want to leave you with to start to think about how would you dissect these as enterprises. The first big thing is this concept of talent management. When you look at these new organizations, they obviously have the core things that every company has, but this is not enough for you to be able to drive how you run your business. What you need to start to think about is the analytics behind the behaviors. Are you in a model where you are capturing every piece of data about behaviors? It could be anonymous. It doesn't have to be about the individual in particular. But do you have fast trending data to be able to make data-driven decisions really, really quickly? The second is learning. You can have a unidirectional learning system, right, where you're sending information to people, but in these network-based business models that you just saw, the information is about how you're driving peer-to-peer sharing, how you're taking the best drivers, taking the information that they have, sharing it with the new drivers, how you're driving velocity in your data to be able to keep up with these new digital models. You cannot only rely on core, you need the core. The question becomes, how are you driving these information networks? Performance acceleration, another big topic. It is not based on doing the old school performance reviews. You are looking at behaviors, you're looking at actions, you're seeing how vibrant your employee networks are inside the company, and you can start to really be able to monitor who's doing what, who are the experts at what I need, how do I start to leverage talent inside organizations. The second is in the area of customer engagement. We have spent the last 40 years, I work for SAP, we are one of the companies that puts these technologies into place. You've got your customer records in place, you've got marketing plans, you've got service tickets for your call centers. This is baseline technologies. This is not what is going to drive the digital world on its own. You need these are core. But what these organizations that you just saw, and we've studied them, are looking at is things like this. It is behavioral analytics. What do they know about the end customer or prospect before they even called you? By the time they call you, they're not a prospect anymore. How do you grab information about these users well in advance and drive velocity around it? That is the new customer engagement model that you need to look at. Expert networks. How much latency exists in your organization? Do you really know who the experts are to be able to rally around these customers? Every single one of those business models is based on customer success. and be able to drive customer success. You can't do that unless you have the best experts in your organization, knowing the worst problems in your organization and trying to solve them. This is how these companies work, right? And then peer reviews again. We talked about Uber. That is the fundamental model where everybody on both sides is rated in the open. Do you have these high velocity models inside your organization? And then finally on the supplier side, it's the same thing. We've taken care of the foundational transactional stuff, but are you driving core innovation through these partners? When you look at what Tesla does, for example, the data about the car and about how you drive and what applications you use passes all the way through to the supply chain. Everybody in the supply chain gets to see that. So you can start to drive improvement in how your business works. Do you have that kind of low latency inside your organizations to be able to compete with these new models? So this is some of the fundamental thinking that organizations who are, if you're an incumbent organization and you're looking at either the threats that these new business models bring, or you want to transform your own business to drive it, these are the levers that you're going to need to pull around talent management, around customer engagement, and rethinking the power that you bring through your supply chain. These are the table stakes of every single example that I provided. This is what they have sorted out already. So to the degree that you understand how these matter to your business, the faster you do that, the faster you're in a position to be able to use the right platform technologies that you have, the right business applications that sit around that, and then understanding what are the networks I need to own or participate in. That is fundamentally what it is. This is how you will eventually drive and unlock disruption in your enterprises. I work for SAP. This is how we think about these technologies. We've got 17 million users on our collaboration platforms to drive customer engagement and employee engagement. We've got 1 million suppliers, and we've got some of these cloud applications that are data-centric that allow us to be able to bring the underpinnings of data-driven business models to bear for our customers. Thank you very much.
Great.
Good timing?
Yes, perfect timing. So let's take a seat. We still have some time for Q&A. So, essentially, if we bring it down, it's we have to think from the customer, then we can do the disruption.
Yeah, I think you have to paint a picture of the experience a customer wants, and then you back that into the kinds of technologies, platforms, and networks you participate in.
That's easy for those product marketing people who are thinking in solutions for the customers, but how about the business process people who are just thinking about the process within the company, how to serve internal needs at that point?
Well, I think, so I think there's two pieces to that, right? First is your core technology is not going away. You need to close the books. You need your accounting systems. You need all the systems, right? This is the transformative layer that sits on top of it. That's how we look at it, right? And so when we look at it, we look at sort of the combination of people, data, process, and content, and you start to understand what are those white spaces that need to be filled to be able to serve these customers better, right? It's not about throwing out what you have. It's layering social collaboration technologies, for example, customer engagement platforms on top of these transactional systems so that you can drive the right decision making based on the data that comes out of it. That's the difference.
But still, thinking in the last mile means at that point I have to think about customers. So it's the external customer at that point, or do I have to think about the internal customers?
No, I think it starts with the external customer. Absolutely, right? And then you think about what are the internal ramifications. Am I in a world where my customers are moving at such high velocity amongst them?
Yeah.
And then the minute they hit my doorstep, I have a 25-year-old infrastructure that doesn't allow me to respond fast enough. These competitors I brought up don't have the baggage.
Yes.
Right? It's greenfield. And so we can complain about it or we can do something about it. And the question becomes, how do you start to decouple the transaction layer with the engagement layer? So this can move at the pace that it needs to move. Today that's the problem. It's being limited by the transaction layer. Right?
So, but how do we bring this together also in the minds of the people? So this is so technologically, there are nearly no problems, so we can integrate the one system with the other. But at the end, we have to change the company.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great question, and I think this is a question we've dealt with forever, right? Whether it comes to social technologies, collaboration technologies, honestly, you can't start inside out. You can't start with promising a better world. You start with a collective understanding on the snapshot of what is your customer's persona going to look like now and over the next 10 years. Once you agree on that, then you have the license to start to say, what are the changes we need to make to respond to that customer, because if we don't, somebody else will. That is the only common language that works to be able to fight culture, old ways of working.
So with the idea of really taking the customer into account of our thinking or pondering about this collaboration thing, we are also closer to the business, is that right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a recalibration, right? Of who the customer is. If you look at the restaurant business, for example, there may be a certain way that you've been looking at potential customers, visitors, and then someone like Manchuri comes around and says, I'm actually going to send the chef to your house. You didn't even think about that. That's the kind of thinking where you start to say, over the next 10 years, this is what I'm going to be competing with. Not just the restaurant down the street, but good food showing up at your house.
But still, I'm always coming back at this point, because also in our discussions this morning, we always drifted towards a very strategic, high-level discussion at that point. That we really always have to take into account the whole transformational vision behind it, etc. And what you're saying is also we have to take into account the customer and think from there. Who should be in charge for that? So because there are a lot of people out there who are on the project level in charge for making collaboration successful. I doubt that they can really take into account the customer at that point.
I think it's a great question, and I think this is exactly where we fall into trouble, right? Because it looks so daunting, because everyone needs to stop what they're doing, and that's not going to happen. Where we've seen the most success with this is when at least two constituencies come together. One is people on the front lines who probably have a better snapshot of the customer. The second is the core competency of your business and your organization. If you are, I don't know, if you're in manufacturing, or if you're in retail and you're like an Amazon, what is Amazon's core competency? It's not retail; it's actually the supply chain. So if the supply chain, which is the core of your business that differentiates you every day, and a snapshot of the customer, if those two teams first come together, that is the nucleus of your organization that will start to drive stuff. Bringing everybody to the seat in the beginning, I don't believe will get you far. You have to start with the core competency and understanding where the customer is and get everybody on board. Those are the only two ways it starts. If your core competency is selling and retail, then you start there.
Yeah.
Right? That we have seen success time and time again, and I have customer examples of that's exactly when it works.
But still, I still would like to emphasize at that point that only the top management can really take this direction, isn't it?
I believe that this is a non-starter if the top management is not behind it, yes. I do not believe, unlike a lot of the social business thinking, it could be ground up, bottoms up, this is not. If there is no belief by the top management that the customer's dynamics and expectations are changing, then this doesn't go anywhere.
But there might be still some people in charge for this collaboration thing. So they have to wait until the top management has a paradigm shift in their mindset? Or can they somehow drive the change of the mindset? Yeah,
I mean, we've seen both, right? They can drive it by showing small examples, but no, I don't believe that you can drive it if there is no collective belief that our industry is under transformative threat, right? If there isn't one, then the collaboration changes are piecemeal, and that's not strategic, right? So I don't know, I've always been the type, like I'm not, to me, like the bottoms up thing, needs a balance with a belief from the top down that this can actually move the business forward.
So essentially, you're saying that the digital transformation as well, especially the disruptive digital transformation, can only succeed if there's a threat from outside?
Well, either there's a threat from outside, or you see the market dynamic shifting before your competitors do.
Okay.
Right? Either one.
Okay. So what are your recommendations on how to proceed with? I can make some analysis of my customer needs, and therefore find an idea on how to change my product, and then disrupt my process.
Well, I think it's
approach to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is really understanding. Look, any kind of data arbitrage has gone away. Right? Data arbitrage is done. You know, your customer knows as much or more about you, your business, and your best competitor, right? So living in that reality, right, you have to be ready to provide data-driven solutions to this customer. So the question starts with, can I adapt in the flow to this customer's needs, or is it a batch process?
Okay.
And you can't fix something till you don't have the data. You need the data to be able to really understand what the problem is, right? And so to me, this is fundamentally getting your data under control first, and really getting a snapshot on the customer to be able to then realize what is the right modicum for engagement with this customer. How do they want to engage? Do they want to engage with me? Do they want to engage in a marketplace setting where I get out of the way and I bring the best suppliers and the best customers? What is that model in which this is going to work? That has to be established first, right? So I do think, though, that you can't just throw social collaboration technologies at this problem and hope that all this goes away, right? If you don't have the right data, you will not know what mechanisms to influence. So I think you start there, and this is where most companies, frankly, are still struggling. They have not got their data under control, and they are most likely losing to these upstarts, not because of the engagement, just the speed of data and knowledge that they have. By the second they can tell trends changing. Right?
Okay, so if we try to draw a blueprint for a good strategy.
Yeah.
So there's not
let's try one without a problem, right?
Yeah, there's no one blueprint that fits to all.
Right.
We know about this, but still, what are the cornerstones of a good blueprint? So you say the data insights first about the customers, trends and developments.
Right. So I think I had those three buckets up there, right? Yeah. So I think to me it's three things. First is understanding the untapped utility in your space. Is there an untapped utility? Is the dynamics of the model such that someone is controlling the demand and supply, right? It's like what we saw with Uber. When you got an Uber in place, you suddenly realize that there should be a lot more taxis on the road, and there's a lot more people who would love to take cabs, but the model is just too expensive or it doesn't work. Is there untapped utility? Because if you don't go after it, somebody is going to go after it. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is once you understand what that is, then understanding what is the data-driven model behind it that actually works. And then the third is what is the right engagement model required in your business? How do you want your customers to interact with each other, or buyers and suppliers? What is it, right? How much data do you want shared between them so that you get out of the way and it's an authentic business? Third is how do your employees need to be structured and collaborating to keep up with that customer, right? And then the fourth is we have created unnecessary artificial boundaries between suppliers, partners, customers, that whole world, right? And largely because technologies were built that way, sort of, here's my supply chain technology. Nobody else should ever touch it. And breaking those molds, because every one of these people have taken out all information hoarding out of that entire space, right? Okay.
So wrapping this up is really, driving the digital transformation is really a top management job.
It is, if the top management doesn't believe that there is a disruption to be had, then why are you doing it? Don't do it.
And it should start on the outside.
Absolutely.
And coming to the inside?
100%. 100%.
And based on data?
Based on data.
And then at some point we can accelerate the transformation process with collaboration suites. Yes,
and because we'll know what kind of collaboration, because you know better than most that collaboration without a purpose is not showing adoption results. By this model, you will understand what is the right mode of collaboration and engagement required to succeed. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So what's the key point at SAP? Because we're way before time.
Well, I think, to me, that what's most exciting is that we've broken our business up into platforms, applications, and business networks. Those three pieces are going to be central to any kind of transformation. You are going to want the best business applications in the cloud, on-premise, wherever. You are going to want to extend those to make them competitive, to drive competitive advantage, which is where a platform comes in. And the third is whether it's supplier networks or partner networks, employee contingent networks, or social collaboration with Jam, we own some of the, as collectively the largest network model in the business. So we have the network for you to participate in and take some of this latency out of your business.
Great. Thank you, Samir, for coming.
Nice to see you. Thank you very much.